It's been a lot lately, hasn't it? Yeah? Check your planner, your calendar, whether that's paper or there's been a lot that we've been doing lately. Because this is a season of a lot of things. This season that we're in right now, there's just a ton going on. It's a season of end of semester pressures, of travel plans and arrangements and changes, of holiday parties and of putting up decorations, of Christmas cards and winter concerts, of presents to buy and presents to wrap and cookies to bake and schedules to negotiate and back-to-back basketball games to attend to, and just generally kind of the need of being three places at the same time. And am I the only one in here? Anybody else? A couple. Okay. This is a season of a lot of things. And that begs a question. How do you handle a bunch of things? How do you handle a bunch of things all at once? And if that's not enough, just the uptick of things on your calendar, all the things to do, for a lot of us, this is a season that carries with it some really profound pain. Like pain from losing a loved one, missing one unknown. Pain from the memory of a conversation that changed a relationship or a diagnosis that changed your life. Things get heightened around December. Whether it's your first year with this memory or your 30th, because holidays make time less linear. It makes it more circular. Holidays help us feel the rhythm of life, the connection across years. So even though that thing might have happened 15 years ago, in December it feels fresh. It's right there. So in the middle of all this, on this third Sunday of Advent, this Joy Sunday, 1 Thessalonians has the audacity to tell us to grit our teeth, slap a happy face on it, and somehow manage to do everything with your hands folded and your eyes closed and your head bowed. Right? Didn't you hear that? Rejoice always. Pray continually. Give thanks in all circumstances. I think this names some of the pressures that a lot of Christians feel. I think it underlies some of why church sometimes feels like a masquerade, where we've all got our masks up. I was having a conversation with someone this week, and they said, for most of my life, I felt like church was the place where I was least likely to actually say how I really was. Because the times that I did acknowledge what was really going on, people didn't know how to handle it. What a tragedy. But that's what Paul is saying, right? Well, maybe not. Maybe that's not really what's going on in 1 Thessalonians. And in fact, I would say that I think what Paul is going for in closing out this first letter that he wrote, or at least the first one that we have, I think Paul's encouragement here is actually to be completely aware of the complications of real life. I don't think he's giving us a list of just one more thing to do, but instead naming a freedom that is already ours. Psychiatrist and literary scholar, yes, I said that not a mistake, psychiatrist and literary scholar Ian McGilchrist has outlined two really interesting ways of looking at the world, which is, as you might know, a bunch of things. McGilchrist outlines two different ways of looking at the world, and one of them sees the world as a collection of just individual parts, like a pile of Legos, right? Those parts might be put together in this way or that way, this is a tremendously useful way of living in the world. To look at the world as this collection of raw material. I'm really grateful for this mode of thinking when I take the car to the shop and I need the mechanic to be able to figure out, like, what's the thing that it is that's wrong. It's super useful. And we all tend to use this way of looking at the world either when we're really familiar with the situation we're in, like we've been here a million times and we know the categories and we just... And the other way is when we really desperately need control. There's another way of looking at the world. And instead of building the world from the bottom up, like from atoms, as it were, McGilchrist describes another way of looking at the world, which is from the top down. In other words, it sees the whole all at once, just as it is. And McGilchrist writes that this way of seeing the world is less about utility. It's less useful, but it's more about appreciation. It's less about industry. It's more about wonder. And it's about meeting the world precisely as it is and less for what you might engineer out of it. Now, McGilchrist insists that it's essential to look at the world in both of these ways. But the second way, the way of seeing the whole, is what should both begin and end our every interaction. And friends, I think this is actually what Paul is doing here in 1 Thessalonians on this third Sunday of Advent, a way of living in the world that lives in the wholeness and the connectedness of this pervasive relational world that God has made and declared good. I think Paul is pushing back on this idea that the world is just a random collection of parts ready to be assembled at the whim of any in power. I think he's pushing back on the idea that the world is unrelated raw materials, just waiting for someone to do something with it. The reason I think this is so is because, well, in 1 Thessalonians, there's this, in these verses, our scripture today, there's this line that runs through it about wholeness. Listen again to what we heard, and I'm going to put the emphasis just in a very particular way. You'll hear it. Rejoice always. Pray continually. Give thanks in all circumstances. Test them all. Reject every kind of evil. May God himself sanctify you through and through. May your whole spirit, soul, and body be kept blameless. All throughout all of these different things that Paul is saying, everything is connected to this picture that's not zoomed in on the bad moment and saying, okay, figure out how to be joyful here. Paul is saying, on the whole, in this whole big world that is new and that is now because of Jesus, because of this whole, you're freed to rejoice. You're freed to pray. You're freed to give thanks. This is even more clear in the Greek, which, like English, when we tend to read the first word as the most important, which is why it's really to say rejoice always, pray continually, as if the point of this is the rejoice, the pray, the give thanks. Those are really important. But in the Greek, it's the whole that starts first. It's always rejoice in the Greek, continually pray in the Greek, give thanks always in the Greek. The always, the wholeness is what Paul comes back to again and again and again. So how do you handle a lot of things? Whether it's items on the calendar or events in the world. I think Paul is saying is to keep the whole in mind. This is the only way to rejoice always, to pray continually, to give thanks in all circumstances. And do not forget, Paul, the whole is that in Jesus, God has begun to renew and heal all things down to the atoms themselves. In Jesus, God has reconciled all things. This whole picture, this whole frenetic world being made at peace, that has actually started and that it will finish is what underlies Paul's exhortation to us. His naming that we are free always to rejoice. Because, to be honest, there are some things that are really hard, right? But this is precisely how we can give thanks in all circumstances. Right? Note that it's not because of all circumstances. Right? This world, there are things in this world that are just wrong. There are things in this world that are just wrong and for which we should grieve and not be thankful. So Paul says it's the light of the whole. It's in the light of the whole that we can, because for some things in this world of war and abuse and of isolation and injustice, sometimes the way to give thanks is only because it won't always be this way. Sometimes the way to rejoice is that this horror won't always be here. But friends, that is huge. That is a lot. And that is more than can be counted on outside of Jesus. Friends, it is because of Jesus that we can know that no matter where you go, no matter where you are in the world, what you have seen, what you have lived, what tomorrow looks like it will be. Friends, the old creation and all of its pain and all of its disorder and all of its problems, friends, it's on its way out. And the new creation is coming. It has started and it continues apace until it is fully finished. Friends, this is how we can rejoice, not because of all circumstances, but no matter what is happening. The future is Christ on the throne, a remade world where there's no crying or tears or pain. Friends, this is the joy that is deep and pervasive. It is not less than any happiness in the world. It is the sum total and even more. You know, I wonder something. When you think about happiness, parties, do you ever think about how we just tend to keep that away from God and the church? I mean, most of us like happiness, right? And joy. Yeah. But can you imagine a real party happening here at church with these people? Like a real party. Can you imagine that? And if you can't, you should try. Because we should try. Because it is true that the joy, that Christian joy does transcend brief happiness. The joy here, Paul is not talking about like a drug high that evaporate. That's not what he's talking about. But the joy, sometimes I think Christians, we make the mistake of making that distinction too wide and saying, well, the joy that Paul is talking about is really something that we feel in a very deep way, in the somber, I'm so joyful right now. What would it be? What would it be if we learned to experience, to lean into the fullness of joy that is here because of Jesus? Friends, I present that to us as a challenge, as a church, to work that out. But as we do that, remember that this is not something, even this project of imagining that is not something that we are called to reach down and pull ourselves up by our own joy bootstraps. Because Paul says, after saying all of these things, that it is God himself. It is God himself who will do all of these things in you and in us. So I don't know how long it's going to take till we get that party here. But you know what? God's going to do it. It's going to happen. And you're going to see it with your own eyes in the land of the living. And that's why we come here to this table. This table is not owned by me or anyone else, but by Jesus alone. It's at this table that we receive bread for the journey, that we receive strength to remember how all the individual parts connect to the whole.